She lived alone for 30 years, rejecting the life of luxury her family offered, until a powerful CEO found her and claimed what was his. When he shows up at her door, claiming to have loved her from afar, she refuses to let him into her world, a world of wealth and status she left behind. But when shocking truths start to surface, including the secret they both share, everything she's ever known is turned upside down. As the past collides with the present, will she finally embrace the love she's spent years running from? Or will the cost of her independence be too high? Can love truly heal old wounds, or is it just another trap waiting to be sprung? What will she choose, freedom or the man who's determined to claim her? Tell me in the comments where you're watching from right now, and if this story speaks to you, make sure you hit subscribe so you don't miss the next one. The evening air was thick with the scent of rain, and Elizabeth Mitchell sat by her window, staring out at the quiet street below. Her small home, tucked at the edge of town, was a refuge from the chaos of the world, a place where she could breathe, think, and for the most part, be alone. For 30 years, she had chosen this life. It had been her decision, and she had never regretted it. She didn't need the wealth her family offered. She didn't need their expectations or the stifling pressure of their world. She had carved out her own existence, one free from the confines of their opulent lifestyle. Her mind wandered back to the past, to the days when she had been surrounded by her family's riches. The mansion they had lived in was beautiful, but it had always felt cold, empty, despite the luxury that surrounded them. Her father, distant and stern, had made it clear that success meant more than anything else. Her mother, too, had never understood why she turned her back on it all. They had never been a family in the truest sense of the word, and the older Elizabeth grew, the more she realized that the world her parents wanted her to embrace wasn't the one she wanted for herself. As she was lost in thought, there was a knock at the door. Startled, Elizabeth stood and walked to the front of the house. It wasn't often that anyone came by, especially this late. When she opened the door, she wasn't prepared for what she found. Standing on her doorstep was a man, tall, broad-shouldered, dressed in an expensive suit. His features were sharp, his dark hair perfectly combed, and his eyes, the color of stormy skies, were locked onto hers with an intensity that made her heart race. He smiled, though it was a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Elizabeth Mitchell?" he asked, his voice rich with authority. "Yes." Her voice was steady, but inside, her mind was already spinning. Who was this man? "I'm Sebastian Carter," he said, stepping forward slightly. "I've been looking for you for a long time." Elizabeth's brows furrowed in confusion. "Looking for me? I don't understand." He took a breath, as though preparing himself. I'm the man who has loved you for years, ever since we were children." Elizabeth's pulse quickened, her instincts telling her to close the door, to shut out this stranger who knew far too much. But she stood frozen in place, as if something beyond her control had rooted her to the ground. "Listen," Sebastian continued, his tone softer now, but no less earnest. "I know this is a lot, but I'm here to tell you the truth. You've been on my mind for years. Your family, your life, it's all connected to mine, whether you like it or not. You don't have to run from it." Elizabeth's heart raced as memories flooded her mind. Her family, her father, the promises he had made to her, the ties that bound her to the wealth she had rejected. She had fought so hard to escape that life, to forge a different path. But this man, this stranger standing before her, was now claiming that he had been part of it all along. "I don't need your pity," she snapped, stepping back. "I don't need you, and I don't need anyone from that world. I've made my choice." Sebastian didn't move, but his eyes softened. I'm not here to pity you, Elizabeth. I'm here because I care. I've always cared. Her breath caught in her throat. How could he claim to care about her when they had never even met? The confusion twisted inside her, and she felt herself retreating, pulling further away from him, away from everything he represented. I don't want this, she said, shaking her head. I don't want anything from you. Sebastian's gaze never wavered. I'm not leaving until we talk. You can shut me out, but it won't change the fact that you and I are connected. You don't have to face this alone. Elizabeth's mind raced, her thoughts tangled in a web of emotions she wasn't prepared to confront. For years, she had lived a life of quiet independence, free from the shadows of her family's expectations. But now, here was a man, this CEO, who had come out of nowhere, claiming that everything she had fought for was meaningless, that her past had already caught up with her. The storm clouds above seemed to mirror the storm in her heart as she stood there, unsure of what to do next. Part of her wanted to slam the door and never look back. Another part, the part she hated, wanted to hear more. But the walls she had built around her heart were high, and they were thick, and right now they felt like her only defense. Good night, she said softly, before shutting the door with a decisive click, the weight of her decision pressing down on her. As she turned away from the door, the sound of her heartbeat was the only thing she could hear. The next few days were a blur of emotions for Elizabeth. She tried to keep busy, focusing on her teaching, her quiet routines, anything to push away the strange unease Sebastian's visit had caused. But no matter how hard she tried to avoid it, his words kept creeping into her mind. I've always cared, he had said. The sincerity in his voice haunted her. Each evening, when the work was done and the silence of her home settled in, her thoughts drifted back to that encounter. Who was this man, and how could he claim to have loved her for so long? He was a stranger, someone she had never even met until now. And yet, the intensity in his eyes had made her question everything. How could he have known her so well when she had worked so hard to be invisible, to keep her distance from the world of wealth and expectations? Elizabeth knew she had to shake it off. She couldn't let one encounter with a man who claimed to know her ruin her life. But every time she tried to move forward, something kept pulling her back. On the 5th day after Sebastian's visit, she was walking home from work when she saw him again. This time, he wasn't standing at her doorstep, but in the small park near her house, sitting on a bench, his posture calm, but his eyes scanning the street as if he were waiting for her. She froze, her heart pounding. What did he want now? The wind blew through the trees, and she wrapped her coat tighter around her shoulders. For a moment, Elizabeth debated turning and walking away. She didn't need this. She didn't want him in her life, didn't want to open herself up to whatever he was offering. But her feet moved before she could think it through, and within moments she found herself standing in front of him, her gaze unwavering, though her insides were a swirl of confusion. "Why are you here?" she asked, her voice colder than she intended. Sebastian stood up slowly, a faint smile playing at the corners of his mouth. "I told you, Elizabeth. I'm not going anywhere. You're a part of my life, whether you like it or not." "I don't need you in my life," she retorted, folding her arms tightly across her chest. "I've been perfectly fine on my own for 30 years. His smile faded, replaced by a more serious expression. "That's exactly why I'm here. Because I know that you're not just fine. You're lonely, Elizabeth, and I'm not asking you to change your life overnight. But you don't have to carry everything on your own." She bit her lip, a surge of emotion rising inside her. It was true. She had built walls so high, She couldn't remember a time when she hadn't been alone. She had pushed everyone away, convinced that the world would always disappoint her. But the truth was, she wasn't as content as she made herself believe. She had never truly let anyone in. Sebastian took a step closer, his voice gentle but firm. "I know you're scared and I understand, but I'm not asking you to let me in all at once. I'm asking for a chance to show you that I'm not the person you think I am." Elizabeth felt the sting of his words. She wasn't afraid of him, but she was afraid of what he represented, everything she had rejected, everything she had tried to leave behind. She had no intention of being caught up in his world of power and expectations. She had worked too hard to create a life for herself, one that was her own. The last thing she wanted was to be trapped by someone else's idea of who she should be. "I don't need anyone to fix me," she said, her voice quiet but resolute. "I'm fine." Sebastian watched her for a moment, as if weighing his words. Then, with a soft sigh, he spoke again. "I'm not here to fix you. I'm here because I want to be with you. I know I can't change your past, but maybe we can build a future together. I'm willing to fight for that." Her heart fluttered, but she pushed the feeling down. She couldn't let herself feel it. Not now. Not ever. "You don't understand," she whispered, shaking her head. "You can't just walk into my life and expect me to follow along. I don't need saving." "No one's trying to save you, Elizabeth," Sebastian said softly. "I just want to be a part of your life, if you'll let me." There was a long pause, and for a moment Elizabeth considered his words. She could feel her resolve wavering, the cold wall she had built around herself beginning to crack. But just as quickly as the thought came, she shut it down. "I don't want this," she said firmly, her tone leaving no room for negotiation. "I've made my decision." Sebastian nodded, but his eyes didn't leave hers. "I'm not giving up. I'll give you time, but I won't walk away. I care about you, Elizabeth, and I always will." With that, he turned and walked away, leaving Elizabeth standing in the park, the weight of his words sinking deep into her chest. She had never expected this. She had never imagined that someone would care so much, not just for the person she had become, but for the person she had been. And for the first time in years, Elizabeth felt a flicker of doubt. The days that followed were filled with silence. But the kind of silence that only amplified the noise inside Elizabeth's mind. She could not escape the memory of Sebastian's words, nor the look in his eyes when he had left her standing in the park. "I care about you, Elizabeth." How could he, a man of power and wealth, care about someone like her, a woman who had made it clear she wanted nothing to do with that world? Elizabeth spent the following days hiding behind her work, burying herself in her students' needs and lesson plans, trying to distract herself from the growing unease that lingered in her chest. But every time she walked past her small kitchen window, the memory of Sebastian's steady gaze would flash before her, and she would feel the unsettling stir of something she couldn't name. That Friday evening, after another long week of teaching, Elizabeth decided to take a walk to clear her head. She pulled on her jacket and stepped outside, the crisp air cool against her skin. The streets were quiet, the only sound being the soft crunch of leaves beneath her boots as she walked through the neighborhood. She needed to get away, to think, and maybe, just maybe, to regain some of the peace she had lost. She turned a corner and found herself at the edge of the park, the same park where Sebastian had stood just days ago. The bench he had sat on was empty now, bathed in the soft, golden light of the setting sun. Elizabeth hesitated, but then moved towards the bench, feeling an inexplicable pull, as if the universe itself was guiding her toward the very place she had tried so hard to avoid. As she sat down, her mind went back to the park, to that moment when Sebastian had stood before her and opened his heart. She had rejected him. But why? What was it about him that made her so afraid? Was it the thought of being vulnerable, of needing someone when she had spent so many years convincing herself she didn't? Her thoughts were interrupted by the sound of footsteps approaching, and when she looked up, she saw him. Sebastian. He was walking toward her, his stride purposeful but relaxed. There was no trace of the tension that had marked their last encounter. He didn't look surprised to see her there. He simply stopped a few feet away and waited, as if giving her space to decide what would happen next. "I didn't expect you to come back," she said quietly, her voice barely above a whisper. "I told you I wouldn't leave," he replied, his voice warm and steady. "You don't have to let me in all at once, but I'm not going anywhere." Elizabeth sighed, her heart heavy. The words she wanted to say, wanted to scream even, stuck in her throat. She didn't know how to navigate this, how to fight the feelings he was stirring up in her, how to ignore the pull she felt toward him, even though everything inside her screamed to walk away. "Why do you keep doing this?" she asked, her voice tinged with frustration. "You don't know me. You don't know anything about my life or why I left that world behind." Sebastian took a step closer, his eyes softening. "I know enough to understand that you're not truly free, Elizabeth. You've built a life for yourself, but it's not the life you deserve. You don't have to carry this burden alone." She shook her head. "I've made my peace with it. I don't need anyone to rescue me." "I'm not trying to rescue you," he said, his voice quiet but sincere. "I'm trying to be with you, to share your life, to help you find peace if you'll let me." There it was again, the simplicity of his words, the weight they carried. Elizabeth swallowed hard, her mind racing. She had been so sure of her choices, so certain that her path was the right one. But now, with Sebastian standing before her, the certainty seemed to slip away, replaced by a gnawing uncertainty. "I don't know if I can do this," she whispered, more to herself than to him. "I don't know if I can open up to you." Sebastian's eyes softened, and for a moment he said nothing. Then, slowly, he sat down beside her on the bench, close, but not too close. "You don't have to open up all at once. You can take your time, but I'm here, and I'm not leaving, no matter what." Elizabeth's chest tightened, and she felt a lump form in her throat. She had spent so many years building walls, pushing people away, protecting herself from the hurt she feared would come. But now, with Sebastian sitting beside her, there was something different. Something she didn't quite understand but could no longer deny. "You really mean it, don't you?" she asked softly, her voice shaking slightly. "I do," he replied without hesitation. "I've always meant it." The silence between them stretched on, but it wasn't uncomfortable. It was full of possibility, of something Elizabeth had never allowed herself to truly believe. Hope. Maybe she had spent too long in the shadows of her past, convincing herself that she was better off alone. But now, with Sebastian by her side, that familiar, suffocating loneliness seemed to fade just a little. And for the first time in years, Elizabeth wondered if maybe, just maybe, there was a place for love in her life after all. As the sun dipped lower in the sky, casting long shadows across the park, Elizabeth let out a quiet breath, her heart still unsure but undeniably open. And for the first time in a long time, she allowed herself to imagine a future, not alone, but with someone who had the courage to stand by her, no matter the cost. The following days passed in a blur of emotions for Elizabeth. After her conversation with Sebastian in the park, she had retreated into herself, unsure of what she was feeling. There was a strange comfort in his presence, in the calm assurance he exuded, but there was also fear. Fear that by opening herself up to him, She might be letting go of the very thing she had fought for, her independence, her freedom from a world that had always tried to control her. Still, she couldn't shake the image of Sebastian sitting beside her, his words echoing in her mind. "I'm here, and I'm not leaving, no matter what." It was a promise, one that sounded so simple, yet so powerful. But was she ready to trust it? To trust him? The morning after their meeting, she woke up early, as was her routine. The kitchen smelled of fresh coffee, and the sun streamed through the window, casting a soft glow over her small dining table. She sat down with her cup, staring at the quiet street outside, her mind racing. She had spent so many years building walls around herself, but now Sebastian was breaking through them, piece by piece. She didn't know what to do with that. By the time she left for work, Elizabeth had made up her mind. She would give herself some space from Sebastian. She would continue to live her life, focus on her work, and not think about the complicated feelings she was starting to develop for him. It was easier that way. Safer. But life had other plans. When Elizabeth arrived at the school, she was met by a surprise. As she entered her classroom, she found a small bouquet of flowers sitting on her desk, a simple note attached to them. For the woman who deserves more than she lets herself believe. Her heart skipped a beat as she stared at the flowers. Sebastian had done this. She knew it immediately. He had thought of her, again. The gesture, simple as it was, stirred something in her, a mixture of warmth and doubt. She wanted to be angry. She wanted to push him away. But instead her fingers hovered over the petals and her thoughts raced. He had been consistent, patient. He wasn't giving up. But she wasn't sure she was ready to open herself up like that. Later that day, during lunch, Elizabeth found herself sitting alone in the teacher's lounge, her lunch untouched. The flowers had not left her mind, and she couldn't shake the tugging feeling in her chest. As she sat there, a small voice inside her whispered, "Maybe you're ready for more than you think." But just as quickly she silenced that voice. She couldn't afford to be weak, to be vulnerable. Not again. When school ended for the day, she found herself walking toward her car, her footsteps slow and deliberate. The weight of the decision pressed down on her shoulders. She couldn't keep running from this, from Sebastian, from the life he wanted to offer her. But she also couldn't dive in head first without knowing the truth. Who was he really? Why was he so determined to win her heart? Just as she reached her car, her phone buzzed. A text from Sebastian. "I know you're busy, but I'd really like to talk. Meet me tonight if you can. It's important." Elizabeth stared at the screen, her thumb hovering over the keyboard. She hadn't been expecting this. She had no idea what he wanted to talk about. Was it about the flowers? About their conversation in the park? Part of her wanted to ignore the text, to put her walls back up. But another part, the part she had been suppressing for days, wanted to know what he had to say. She couldn't keep pretending like he didn't matter, like his presence didn't shake something inside her. Taking a deep breath, she typed back, "Okay, I'll meet you tonight." As the sun began to set that evening, Elizabeth found herself standing in front of a small cafe downtown, the one she had always passed by but never had the time to visit. Sebastian had suggested it. She wasn't sure why, but something about the place felt right, felt intimate. She wasn't sure what to expect from this meeting, but she knew she had to go. She stepped inside, the warm glow of the cafe embracing her immediately. The soft hum of conversation and the smell of fresh bread and coffee made her feel strangely at ease. Her gaze quickly found Sebastian sitting at a table, in the corner, his eyes on her the moment she walked in. He smiled, a soft, genuine smile that reached his eyes and waved her over. Elizabeth walked toward him, her heart beating a little faster than usual. When she sat down, he didn't waste time. He was direct, as always. "I want to be honest with you, Elizabeth," he said, his voice steady. "I'm not here to pressure you. I'm here because I believe in us, in what we could have together." Elizabeth took a deep breath, trying to steady the whirlwind of emotions that threatened to overwhelm her. "You don't know me," she said softly. "You don't know what I've been through." "I don't need to know everything," he replied, his eyes unwavering. "What I know is that I care about you. I know that you're worth more than you believe, and I want to be here for you, no matter what." The sincerity in his voice caught her off guard. Her heart ached with a mixture of longing and fear. She had spent so many years building walls, convincing herself that love wasn't worth the risk. But here was a man who was offering it to her, with no strings attached, no hidden motives. But could she trust him? Could she trust herself? "I don't know if I'm ready for this," she admitted, her voice trembling slightly. Sebastian's smile softened. "You don't have to be ready. You don't have to make any decisions tonight. All I'm asking is for a chance to show you that love doesn't have to be scary. It doesn't have to mean losing yourself." Elizabeth swallowed hard, the lump in her throat growing. He was offering her something she hadn't allowed herself to hope for, a future that wasn't dictated by her past, by her fear. For the first time, she felt a flicker of something hopeful deep inside. And though she wasn't sure what the future held, she knew one thing: she wasn't alone anymore. The next few days were filled with a delicate tension that Elizabeth couldn't shake. She had agreed to meet Sebastian, to hear him out, but what had followed was not what she had expected. There had been no grand declarations, no overwhelming rush of emotions, just a quiet, steady presence, a man who wasn't trying to convince her with words alone, but with actions. He had given her space. He had waited for her to take the first step, which, for Elizabeth, was both comforting and unnerving. After their conversation at the cafe, she had gone home feeling more confused than ever. She hadn't made any decisions, hadn't given him any promises, but she had allowed herself to be vulnerable for the first time in years, and that in itself had been both frightening and exhilarating. The following week, Sebastian had continued to show up in her life in the most subtle ways. He didn't overwhelm her with constant messages or phone calls. Instead, he simply made his presence known when needed, dropping off small gifts at the school, sending her a text just to ask how her day was going. Nothing extravagant, nothing demanding, just steady, constant, thoughtful gestures. One evening, after another long day at school, Elizabeth found herself sitting in her kitchen, a cup of tea warming her hands. She had been trying to focus on grading papers, but her thoughts kept wandering to Sebastian. The small, seemingly insignificant things he had done for her kept replaying in her mind. The flowers, the texts, the kindness in his eyes, and the way he hadn't pressured her, hadn't tried to push her into something she wasn't ready for. "Maybe I've been too harsh," she thought. "Maybe I've been too afraid to let someone care." Her phone buzzed, snapping her out of her thoughts. It was a message from Sebastian. "Would you like to go for a walk tomorrow evening? I promise I won't pressure you into anything. Just a simple walk, some fresh air." She stared at the message for a long moment. A walk. No pressure, no expectations. Just two people taking a step forward at their own pace. Elizabeth wasn't sure why, but something in her stirred, a spark of hope she hadn't felt in a long time. She realized she wasn't scared anymore, at least not in the same way. There was something in Sebastian's patience, in his quiet confidence that made her feel like, maybe, just maybe, she could trust him. Trust that this wasn't some fleeting, selfish desire on his part. He wanted to be with her, not for what she could give him, but because he genuinely cared. "I'd like that," she typed back, her fingers trembling slightly as she hit send. The response came almost immediately. "Great. I'll meet you at the park tomorrow at 7. I'll be waiting." The next evening, Elizabeth stood in front of her mirror, looking at herself. She wasn't sure why, but she wanted to look nice. Not for anyone else, just for herself. She had spent so much of her life hiding, keeping herself small, keeping her heart protected. Tonight, she wasn't going to hide. She wasn't going to push Sebastian away just because she was afraid. As she stepped outside, the cool evening air wrapped around her, and she could already feel the weight of the day lifting. The park wasn't far from her house, and as she walked toward it, she couldn't help but notice the quiet beauty of the night. The stars twinkled above, and the world seemed peaceful, as if it were holding its breath for what was to come. When she reached the park, she saw Sebastian standing near the fountain, his hands tucked in his pockets, his gaze lifted to the sky. He looked almost peaceful, in stark contrast to the tension she had felt when they first met. His posture was relaxed, his expression soft, and when he saw her, he smiled. Genuine, easy. "You came," he said, his voice warm and full of surprise, though he had expected nothing less. Elizabeth smiled, though it was a little uncertain. "I said I would." Sebastian stepped forward, his gaze never leaving hers. "I'm glad you did." They started walking together, side by side, without the need for words. The silence was comfortable, not awkward, as if they had already begun to understand each other without needing to explain everything. The walk was slow, unhurried. They passed the trees, the benches, the fountains, all familiar sights to Elizabeth, but somehow new with Sebastian at her side. "Why do you want this?" Elizabeth asked after a few minutes, her voice soft but serious. "Why do you want me? I've told you before, I'm not someone who fits into your world. I don't belong with someone like you." Sebastian didn't hesitate. "You think I want you because of my world?" "No, I want you because of who you are. You're strong, intelligent, independent. You've built a life for yourself despite everything. And that's the kind of person I want beside me. You don't have to change. You don't have to fit into anything. I just want to share my life with you." The sincerity in his voice was undeniable. Elizabeth felt the warmth of his words wash over her, and for the first time in a long while, she allowed herself to believe them. There was no hidden agenda, no expectations. He was simply offering her his heart. "I don't know if I can do this," she said softly, the words slipping from her lips before she could stop them. "I don't know if I can let myself trust you. I've been hurt before, and I've built these walls around me to keep people out. I'm scared." Sebastian stopped walking, turning to face her. He gently took her hand, his touch warm and comforting. "I know you're scared. I see it. But I'm not going anywhere, Elizabeth. I'm not asking for anything more than what you're willing to give, but I promise you, I'll never rush you. I'll never force you. I just want to be here." Elizabeth's breath caught in her throat, and she looked up into his eyes, searching for any hint of deceit. But there was none. All she saw was honesty, warmth, and something that she hadn't felt in years, hope. "I'm not asking you to take a leap of faith," he continued, his voice tender. "I'm asking you to take one small step, and I'll be right here beside you every step of the way." Tears welled up in her eyes, but she didn't look away. She didn't need to hide anymore. Sebastian smiled softly, his thumb gently brushing her hand. "We'll go at your pace. Always." And for the first time, Elizabeth felt like maybe, just maybe, she could let go of the past. She could step forward into a future where love wasn't something to fear, but something to embrace. The days after their walk in the park were filled with a quiet sense of change. Elizabeth felt lighter, as though the weight she had carried for so many years was slowly beginning to lift. She still didn't have all the answers, but something about Sebastian's patience and consistency had cracked open the door to a part of her heart she'd kept, locked away. She no longer felt like she had to keep running from the possibility of love, but that didn't mean she was ready to dive in completely. Sebastian respected her space, never pushing her for more than she was willing to give. He continued his thoughtful gestures, small note, an occasional visit to her school to drop off her favorite coffee, texts asking how her day was going. It was simple, but it was enough. One evening, about a week after their walk, Elizabeth found herself sitting at her kitchen table, reviewing lesson plans, when the phone buzzed. A message from Sebastian. "Dinner? It's been a long week. I thought maybe we could eat together. Just a casual meal, no pressure." Elizabeth smiled at the simplicity of the request. No grand gestures, no pressure, just an invitation to spend time together. It was something she had never imagined she would get used to, yet here she was, wanting it more than she had ever expected. She typed back, "Sure, I'll meet you at 7. That evening, as she prepared for their dinner, Elizabeth couldn't help but feel a flutter in her stomach. She had spent so many years building walls around her heart, convinced that relationships were only sources of pain and disappointment. But here, with Sebastian, things felt different. He wasn't asking her to change or to fit into his world. He was simply offering her a chance to be herself, to take things at her own pace. When Elizabeth arrived at the small restaurant Sebastian had chosen, it felt like a scene straight out of a romantic movie. Soft lighting, a cozy atmosphere, a sense of warmth and comfort. As soon as she stepped inside, Sebastian stood up from the table, his smile genuine and welcoming. He was dressed casually, no suits, no power play, just a man who wanted to spend time with her. "I'm glad you came," he said, pulling out the chair for her. "I know it's not much, but I wanted this to be simple, just us." Elizabeth sat down, feeling a rush of emotion she hadn't expected. It was just dinner, nothing extraordinary, yet in that moment it felt like everything was coming together in a way she hadn't anticipated. They talked about everything, about her work, his business, the little things that made up their daily lives. There was no tension, no awkwardness. Just two people getting to know each other, the conversation flowing naturally. For the first time in years, Elizabeth felt at ease. She was herself. No walls, no pretenses. Just Elizabeth, sitting across from a man who was patiently, quietly showing her that love didn't have to come with strings attached. She wasn't sure where this was going, but for the first time, she wasn't afraid to find out. As they finished their meal, Sebastian leaned back in his chair, his gaze soft but intense. "Elizabeth, I know you're not ready to dive in all at once, and I don't expect that, but I want you to know, I'm here for you, every step of the way." Her heart skipped a beat. The sincerity in his voice was something she couldn't ignore. It wasn't just about love. It was about respect, patience, and understanding. Qualities that she had always yearned for but never thought she'd find. "I don't know where this will go," Elizabeth said quietly, her voice barely above a whisper. "But I want to try. I want to see where we can go. Together." Sebastian's smile widened, and for a moment Elizabeth could see the relief in his eyes. "That's all I've ever wanted," he said. "To have the chance to show you that love doesn't have to be hard. It can be simple, if you let it." They spent the next few hours talking, laughing, and sharing stories. The connection between them deepened, but so did Elizabeth's understanding of herself. For the first time in a long time, she felt like she was allowing herself to be part of something bigger than just her own world. She was beginning to open herself up, not to a life of luxury or the expectations of others, but to a life built on love, trust, and mutual respect. As the evening came to an end, Sebastian walked her to her car, his hand brushing against hers in a quiet gesture of affection. "Thank you for tonight," he said, his voice gentle. "Thank you," she replied, her voice steady but filled with emotion. "For making this easy, for making me feel like it's okay to want something more." As she drove home, Elizabeth couldn't stop thinking about the night. She had taken a small step forward, and it felt like a giant leap toward something she had been too afraid to pursue. The walls she had spent so long building were beginning to crumble, and in their place, there was something more, something warm, something real. For the first time, Elizabeth allowed herself to feel hope, and that was a feeling she hadn't had in a long time. The next few days were a whirlwind of emotions for Elizabeth. The dinner with Sebastian had felt like a breakthrough, a moment when she allowed herself to feel something she hadn't felt in years. Hope. The hope that maybe, just maybe, love wasn't something to fear. It wasn't a burden, a chain, or a trap. It was a gift. Sebastian's presence in her life had become a constant. Every morning, a simple text would greet her. "Good morning. Hope your day is as wonderful as you are." It was small, but it meant something. It meant he was thinking of her, even in the mundane moments of the day. In return, Elizabeth found herself texting him too. Brief messages, nothing too overwhelming, just letting him know she was thinking of him. She was still hesitant to dive in fully, but each text, each small exchange, felt like another step toward something real. But with each step forward, there was still a part of her that held back. She couldn't ignore the past, the deep-seated fears that whispered in her ear whenever she allowed herself to get too close to Sebastian. She had learned the hard way that love came with risks, with pain. It wasn't just about two people coming together. It was about vulnerability, and vulnerability could be dangerous. That Saturday, Sebastian invited her out to a small art gallery opening in town. It was nothing extravagant, just a local artist showcasing his work. It seemed like a harmless, low-pressure event, and Elizabeth, having been busy all week, agreed to go. When she arrived at the gallery, Sebastian was already there, standing near the entrance, his back to her. He turned when he heard her footsteps and smiled. The warmth in his smile was like a beacon, pulling her toward him. "Hey," he greeted her, his voice light and easy. "I'm glad you made it." "I wouldn't miss it," Elizabeth said, trying to keep her tone casual, but inside, her heart was racing. She couldn't explain why, but every time she saw him, it felt like stepping into the unknown, a place where everything she thought she knew was being rewritten. The gallery was small but beautifully lit, with soft music playing in the background. The paintings on the walls were vibrant, filled with life and color. Sebastian guided her through the room, explaining each piece with enthusiasm. Elizabeth couldn't help but admire how comfortable he seemed, how naturally he moved through the world. It was a side of him she hadn't seen before, the side that wasn't just the CEO, the man with the power and prestige. Here, in this space, he was just a man who appreciated art, who found joy in the little things. They spent hours at the gallery, talking about the paintings, the artists' techniques, and their own tastes in art. Sebastian never once brought up anything heavy, no talk of business or family expectations. It was just them, getting to know each other in a way that felt real. As the evening wore on, Elizabeth found herself laughing more than she had in a long time. She was enjoying herself, and for the first time in ages, she wasn't holding back. She could see the way Sebastian looked at her, like she was the only person in the room, like she mattered. And it felt good. Too good. But as they were about to leave, something shifted. Sebastian, noticing the way Elizabeth had tensed slightly, stopped in his tracks. He turned to her, his expression more serious now. "Elizabeth," he said softly, his voice carrying a hint of concern. "I know we're taking things slow, and I respect that, but I need to ask, what are you so afraid of?" The question hung in the air between them, heavy and unexpected. Elizabeth froze, her heart skipping a beat. She hadn't expected him to push this far, to ask such a direct question, but she knew it was coming. She had been waiting for it. She opened her mouth to speak, but no words came out. She didn't know how to answer. How could she explain the years of hurt, the deep scars that still lingered from the relationships she had once tried to build? How could she explain the fear that had taken root in her heart? The fear that trusting someone again would only lead to more pain. Sebastian took a small step closer, his hand gently touching hers. "I'm not asking you to rush, Elizabeth," he said, his voice low and steady. "But I'm asking you to trust me, to let me in, even just a little, because I can't keep pretending that I don't care about you, that I'm okay with just being friends." Elizabeth's breath caught in her throat. She felt the weight of his words settle over her, the tenderness in his touch speaking volumes. She knew he was serious. She knew that he wasn't just playing at this. He was all in, fully committed to whatever they could become. But she wasn't ready. She couldn't be. She had spent so long pushing people away, closing herself off, and now the thought of opening up to Sebastian terrified her. She couldn't bear the thought of being hurt again. "I'm sorry," she whispered, her voice trembling. "I want to be with you, but I can't. I can't give you what you need right now." Sebastian didn't pull away, but his expression softened with understanding. He gave her hand a gentle squeeze, his eyes never leaving hers. "I know, and I'm not going anywhere. I'll give you all the time you need. But I want you to know that I'm here, and when you're ready, I'll be waiting." For a moment, Elizabeth felt a flicker of warmth in her chest, a feeling that she hadn't allowed herself to feel in years. Maybe he's right, she thought. Maybe it's time to stop running. Maybe it's time to stop being afraid. But she wasn't ready to say it out loud. Not yet. As they left the gallery together, Elizabeth felt a mixture of emotions: fear, hope, uncertainty. But most of all, she felt something she hadn't felt in a long time: the possibility of a future. And that scared her more than anything. The next few days felt like an emotional roller coaster for Elizabeth. After her conversation with Sebastian at the gallery, she had retreated inward. The walls she had so carefully built over the years felt like they were crumbling around her, and she didn't know how to stop it. She hadn't expected Sebastian to be so patient with her, to give her the space to process everything. But now, as the days passed, she couldn't shake the feeling that she was standing on the edge of something important, something she wasn't sure she was ready for. Her work at school had been the usual: lessons to prepare, papers to grade, meetings to attend. But even in the midst of the routine, her thoughts kept drifting back to Sebastian. She had wanted to remain strong, to keep herself protected from the vulnerability that seemed to be creeping in. But Sebastian's kindness, his patience, and most of all, his sincerity, made it difficult to ignore the growing feelings she had for him. And then there were the little things, those small, everyday moments that spoke volumes. The text, messages he sent each morning. "Good morning. Hope today's as wonderful as you are." The way he would show up at the school, offering a coffee or simply a kind word. The way he had been there for her without asking for anything in return. She had never experienced that kind of genuine care before, and it left her wondering if it was possible to build a life with someone like him. But there was still so much fear, so much uncertainty in her heart. On the 6th day after the gallery, Elizabeth sat in her small living room, sipping tea, her thoughts a blur of confusion. She had spent so much of her life trying to outrun the possibility of love, convinced that it wasn't for her, that it would only bring pain. But now, Sebastian had come into her life, quietly, steadily, and she couldn't help but feel drawn to him. Still, she wasn't ready to give up the independence she had fought so hard to build. The phone buzzed on the table, interrupting her thoughts. She picked it up, her heart giving a small, hopeful flutter when she saw Sebastian's name on the screen. "I was thinking, dinner tonight. Nothing fancy, just something simple. I want to talk, if you're open to it." She hesitated. She hadn't expected this. After their last conversation, she thought he might give her more space, more time to figure things out. But instead, he was reaching out again, making it clear that he wasn't going anywhere. "Sure, 7 o'clock?" She replied, her fingers trembling slightly as she typed. A message came back almost immediately. "Perfect, I'll pick you up." As the evening approached, Elizabeth found herself standing in front of her mirror, trying to decide what to wear. She hadn't expected to care so much about a simple dinner, but here she was, picking out an outfit as if it were a special occasion. It wasn't that she was trying to impress him. She just wanted to feel good about herself. She settled on a simple, yet elegant dress, something comfortable but flattering. She didn't want to look like she was trying too hard, but she also didn't want to look like she was indifferent. For the first time in a long time, she felt a little nervous, a little excited. The tension she had been carrying in her chest since their last conversation seemed to be easing, just slightly, and she allowed herself to feel that. At exactly 7 o'clock, the sound of a car pulling up outside her window made her jump. She stood there for a moment, taking a deep breath before walking to the door. As she opened it, Sebastian stood there, looking every bit the part of the man who had quietly yet powerfully wormed his way into her heart. His smile was warm, his eyes bright with a mixture of anticipation and affection. "You look beautiful," he said softly, his gaze lingering for a moment longer than necessary. Elizabeth smiled, though it felt a little shaky. "Thank you. You don't look so bad yourself." He chuckled, his voice low and easy. "Let's get going, then." The drive to the restaurant was smooth and quiet, but it wasn't uncomfortable. Sebastian didn't push her to talk, but there was an unspoken connection between them, a comfort that allowed Elizabeth to breathe a little easier. It was as if she didn't need to pretend around him. She could just be herself, and that, more than anything, was what scared her the most. When they arrived at the restaurant, it was a small, cozy Italian place that felt warm and inviting. The moment they walked in, the smell of fresh bread and garlic hit them, and the soft murmur of conversation filled the air. It was just the kind of place Elizabeth had always loved. Simple, unpretentious, and full of character. They were led to a small table by the window, the soft glow of candlelight casting a warm, intimate light over the room. Once they sat down, the waiter took their drink orders, and they fell into a comfortable silence. Elizabeth, though she had been nervous earlier, found herself relaxing. There was something about this moment, about being here with Sebastian, that felt different. It wasn't about expectations or pressure. It was just two people sharing a meal together, getting to know each other. After the waiter left, Sebastian leaned back in his chair, studying her for a moment. "I've been thinking," he began, his voice gentle, "about us, about where we're going. And I wanted to ask, what do you really want, Elizabeth?" The question caught her off guard, and she blinked at him, unsure of how to respond. "What do you mean?" she asked, her voice small. "I mean, what do you want out of this? Out of us?" Sebastian's gaze was steady, his eyes not searching, but simply waiting for her to answer. "I'm not asking you to make a decision right now. I just want to know what you're hoping for." Elizabeth swallowed, feeling a lump form in her throat. It was the question she had been avoiding, the one she had been too afraid to ask herself. What do I want? She hadn't thought about it that way. She had been too focused on the fear of losing herself, of giving too much of herself to someone else. But now, as she looked across the table at Sebastian, she realized that maybe it wasn't about losing herself at all. Maybe it was about finding a way to let someone in without losing who she was. I don't know, she said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. I think I'm scared. I'm scared that if I open up to you, I'll lose myself. I've spent so many years making sure I don't get hurt, making sure I don't need anyone. But with you, it feels different. And that scares me. Sebastian's face softened, and he reached across the table, his hand gently covering hers. You don't have to be afraid, Elizabeth. I'm not going to take anything from you. I just want to be here. I want to be with you. Her heart fluttered at his words. For the first time, she allowed herself to believe it, to believe in the possibility of something real, something lasting. I don't want to lose myself either, she whispered, but maybe it's time to try. The following days after their dinner felt like a shift had taken place within Elizabeth. For the first time, she allowed herself to entertain the idea that maybe love didn't have to be as dangerous as she had always believed. Maybe it wasn't about losing herself. Maybe it was about finding the parts of herself she had buried under years of fear and self-imposed isolation. Sebastian's quiet patience had started to chip away at the walls she had spent decades building around her heart. Every message he sent, every small gesture, every simple conversation seemed to reinforce the idea that he wasn't interested in changing her or forcing her into a life she didn't want. He was offering something entirely different, the chance to be loved for who she was, without conditions, without expectations. Still, despite all the progress, the fear lingered. It was a shadow in the back of her mind, one that couldn't be ignored. Elizabeth had been burned before, by friends, by family, by the idea that love always came with a price. She couldn't afford to let her guard down too quickly. She couldn't afford to trust so easily. Yet, when she was with Sebastian, those doubts began to feel a little less powerful, a little less suffocating. One Saturday afternoon, Elizabeth found herself in a small bookstore in town. It was a place she had always loved, filled with the scent of old paper and the comfort of quiet corners. She had visited the bookstore many times over the years, but this time she wasn't just browsing. She was looking for something, a gift. She had been thinking about Sebastian's request for the last few days. He hadn't pressured her to make any decisions, but he had asked her what she wanted. He had been patient, but he had also been clear. He was serious about her. And while she wasn't ready to make any promises, she wanted to show him that she was at least willing to take small steps. That was why she found herself in the bookstore, searching the shelves for a book that she thought would be just right. A story, one that reflected the complexity of the human heart. She smiled to herself as she found the perfect one, an old classic about love, trust, and redemption. It was simple but meaningful, and for some reason it felt like the right gesture. As she made her way to the checkout counter, Elizabeth's phone buzzed in her pocket. It was a message from Sebastian. I was thinking of you today. I know you've been working hard, so I was wondering if you'd like to take a break this afternoon. Maybe a walk or a coffee, whatever you need. No pressure, just company. She couldn't help but smile as she read the message. The thought of spending time with him, of stepping away from the routine for a while, felt like a breath of fresh air. And yet, the fear still tugged at her. She had spent so many years alone, navigating life on her own terms. The idea of letting someone else into that space was still a challenge, even if Sebastian made it seem easy. Elizabeth paused for a moment, thinking. Then, with a deep breath, she typed back, "Coffee sounds great. Meet you at the cafe in 30?" The response was quick. "Perfect, I'll see you soon." When Elizabeth arrived at the cafe, she spotted Sebastian immediately. He was sitting at a table by the window, his eyes focused on something, though they lit up when he saw her approach. The familiar warmth spread through her chest as she walked over and sat down. "Hey." He greeted her, his voice smooth and easy, as always. "How's your day been?" "It's been good," Elizabeth replied, her smile small but genuine. "Busy but good. How about you?" "Same here," Sebastian said, "but it's nice to have a moment to just relax." They sat there for a moment in comfortable silence, both of them just enjoying the peacefulness of the cafe. The chatter of other customers, the clink of coffee cups, and the soft hum of background music all seemed to fade away as they sat across from each other. The energy between them was warm, familiar, easy. "So," Sebastian began, breaking the silence. "I've been thinking." Elizabeth looked up, raising an eyebrow. "About what?" "About us," he said, his voice quiet but filled with sincerity. "I know we've been taking it slow, and I want to respect that, but I also want to be honest with you." Elizabeth's heart skipped a beat. This was it, the conversation she had been both hoping for and dreading. She had known it was coming. She had known that Sebastian wouldn't wait forever, that at some point he would ask for more than she was ready to give. "Okay," she said, her voice steady, though she felt the tension build inside her. "What's on your mind?" Sebastian leaned forward, his gaze never leaving hers. "I don't expect you to have all the answers right now. I know we're both figuring things out, but I need to tell you that I care about you, Elizabeth. I'm not just saying that to say it. I mean it. I don't want you to feel pressured, but I also don't want to hide how I feel." Elizabeth swallowed hard, her mind racing. She had been preparing for this moment, but hearing the words, hearing the depth of his feelings, made it all so much more real. She had known, of course, that he cared about her, but hearing him say it out loud was different. It was vulnerable, and it made her feel vulnerable too. "I don't know if I'm ready to go all in," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "I've spent so long being independent. I've built my life on my own terms. I'm scared that if I let you in, I'll lose myself. I'm scared that if I open up, I'll be hurt again." Sebastian's expression softened, and he reached across the table, his hand gently covering hers. "Elizabeth, you don't have to lose yourself, and you don't have to rush. All I want is the chance to show you that love can be different. It doesn't have to come with pain or fear. It can be something that helps you grow, not something that takes away from who you are." Elizabeth looked down at their hands, her heart beating wildly in her chest. For the first time, she allowed herself to imagine what it might be like to trust him, to open herself up without fear of losing who she was. "I'm scared," she whispered, the truth finally slipping past her walls. "But I'm willing to try. I'm willing to take that step with you." Sebastian's smile was slow but radiant, and for a moment it felt like the world around them faded away. It was just the two of them, sitting there together, with the promise of something new on the horizon. "I'm not going anywhere," he said softly, his thumb brushing over her hand. "And I won't rush you, but I'm here, whenever you're ready." Elizabeth felt a warmth spread through her chest, something she hadn't felt in a long time, a sense of peace, of possibility. It was still scary, still uncertain, but for the first time in a long time, she didn't feel alone. They sat there for hours, talking about everything and nothing, slowly bridging the gap between their worlds. And in that moment, Elizabeth realized that maybe, just maybe, love wasn't something to fear. It was something to be embraced, something that could help her grow, something that could bring her the happiness she had spent so long believing was out of reach. As they left the cafe together, hand in hand, Elizabeth didn't have all the answers. But for the first time in years, she didn't need them. She was ready to let herself take the next step. The days following their conversation at the cafe felt different. Elizabeth could feel the weight of what she had said, the vulnerability she had allowed herself to express, and it both terrified and exhilarated her. For the first time in a long time, she wasn't running from her feelings. She was standing still, allowing herself to feel the full force of everything she had pushed aside. And yet, as much as she was starting to embrace the possibility of love, the fear lingered. It always did. Sebastian had given her what she needed most: space. He didn't push her further than she was ready to go. He didn't ask for promises or demand declarations. He simply stayed. And with each passing day, she could feel herself letting go of the walls that had kept her isolated for so long. Her life had always been a careful balance between independence and self-protection. She had built a life for herself, one that had been free of the emotional messiness that came with relationships. She had told herself, time and time again, that she was fine alone, that she didn't need anyone. But Sebastian's presence in her life was forcing her to confront that belief. The fear of losing herself in someone else still hung in the air, thick and suffocating. But as the days turned into weeks, she found herself looking forward to the moments she spent with him. She wasn't ready to give all of herself, but she was ready to give more than she had ever allowed herself before. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Sebastian invited her over to his apartment for dinner. They had spent time together in casual settings, but this felt different, more intimate, more personal. Elizabeth hesitated at first, unsure of what it meant. But when she walked into his apartment, she felt a sense of ease settle over her. The space was warm and inviting, not at all what she had expected from a man of his stature. It was simple, but elegant, with soft lighting and an eclectic mix of furniture. The shelves were lined with books, and there were photos scattered around, some of places he had traveled, others of friends and family. It felt lived in, personal, like a reflection of the man who lived there. Sebastian greeted her at the door with a smile that reached his eyes, his warmth filling the room. "I hope you're hungry," he said, taking her coat and hanging it up. "I thought we could try something simple, something homemade." "I'm starving," Elizabeth replied, feeling a small sense of excitement. She had never been one to enjoy formal dinners, preferring the comfort of simple meals shared with people she trusted. He led her to the dining table, where he had already set a small spread. The atmosphere was relaxed, the kind of dinner you might share with an old friend or a partner you felt completely comfortable with. Sebastian poured her a glass of wine, and they spent the next few hours talking about everything and nothing at all. They shared stories of their childhoods, their favorite books, and the dreams they had for the future. But as the evening wore on, Elizabeth began to feel something shift. The conversation had drifted from casual topics to something deeper, something more personal. She hadn't realized how much she had been holding back until the walls started to fall, piece by piece. "Tell me about your parents," Sebastian said after a long pause. "What was your relationship with them like?" Elizabeth stiffened slightly, but she wasn't surprised by the question. They had spoken about their pasts in passing, but this was different. This was deeper. And for the first time, she realized how much she had never shared about her childhood. It was as though, for all the years she had spent avoiding the past, it was finally catching up to her. "I don't have the best relationship with them," she said slowly, her voice quiet. "My father was distant. He didn't really understand me, and he made it clear that I was supposed to follow the family's expectations, work hard, get married, have children, build a life around success. My mother, she's never really understood why I didn't want that. She doesn't understand why I left. Sebastian listened carefully, his eyes never leaving her face. Do you ever wish things had been different? Elizabeth took a deep breath, letting the weight of the question settle in her chest. I don't know. I sometimes wonder if I could have made peace with it, but I've spent so much time running from that life, from the expectations that came with it, and in some ways, I've built this wall around myself to keep from being disappointed. Sebastian nodded, his expression thoughtful. It's hard to live up to expectations that aren't your own, he said softly. But you've done something remarkable, Elizabeth. You've created a life for yourself that's true to who you are. That's something to be proud of. The words hit her harder than she expected. For so long, she had convinced herself that the only way to be strong was to cut herself off from everyone and everything that reminded her of her past. But sitting there, with Sebastian, in the comfort of his home, she realized that maybe strength wasn't about being alone. Maybe it was about facing the parts of herself that had been broken and learning to love those parts again. She looked up at him, her heart racing as she spoke the words she had never allowed herself to say. I'm scared, Sebastian. I'm scared of letting go of the walls I've built, of letting someone else in. I'm afraid of losing myself in someone else's world, of losing the independence I've fought so hard for. Sebastian reached across the table, his hand gently brushing hers. You don't have to lose yourself, Elizabeth. I'm not asking you to change who you are. I'm asking you to let me be a part of your life, to trust that love doesn't have to come with sacrifice. It can be a choice to build something together. Her breath caught in her throat as she looked at him, feeling the weight of his words settle in her chest. For the first time, she didn't feel the need to push him away. She didn't feel like she had to guard herself against the possibility of getting hurt. She just felt open, vulnerable, but open. I want to try, she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. I want to see where this can go. With you. Sebastian's smile was soft and full of warmth. He didn't rush to say anything else. He simply reached out, taking her hand in his, and held it there, as if promising that whatever came next, they would face it together. They spent the rest of the evening talking, laughing, and sharing more about themselves than they ever had before. And as the night drew to a close, Elizabeth felt something she hadn't expected, a sense of peace. The fear was still there, lingering in the back of her mind, but it was no longer the thing that controlled her. For the first time in a long time, she felt like she could breathe, like she could take the next step, not alone, but with someone who was willing to walk beside her. The weeks following Elizabeth's decision to take a step forward with Sebastian were filled with a delicate, slow-growing sense of ease. She had expected everything to feel rushed and overwhelming, but it wasn't. It was calm, steady, and surprisingly comfortable. There were no grand declarations, no expectations that she couldn't meet. Instead, there was a quiet consistency in Sebastian's actions that allowed Elizabeth to let down her guard little by little without feeling pressured. They spent time together regularly, but it was never about grand gestures. It was about simple moments, going for walks in the park, cooking dinner together, sitting in silence while reading, just enjoying each other's presence. It felt normal, like something she had been missing for so long, but never realized. It wasn't a fairy tale or a whirlwind romance. It was something real, something rooted in understanding and mutual respect. One Saturday afternoon, Elizabeth found herself at the local farmers' market, an event she had visited many times on her own, but had never thought to share with anyone. She was picking out fresh vegetables when she received a text from Sebastian. "Are you free this afternoon? I thought we could do something spontaneous. Meet me at the park in 30 minutes?" A small smile tugged at her lips as she typed back, "Sounds good. I'll be there." She wasn't sure what Sebastian had planned, but for the first time in ages, the idea of doing something spontaneous didn't scare her. The fear that had once kept her isolated, kept her from embracing anything beyond her tightly controlled routine, had started to dissolve. She was learning to trust not just him, but herself. 30 minutes later, Elizabeth arrived at the park. The sun was warm, but there was a light breeze, making the afternoon feel just right. As she walked toward the large oak tree near the entrance, she spotted Sebastian standing by a small red picnic blanket, a basket beside him, and a few stray books scattered on the grass. He grinned when he saw her. "You came. I was starting to think I'd have to chase you down." Elizabeth laughed, her heart lifting. "I wouldn't make you chase me," she teased, walking toward him. "You sure about that?" he asked, raising an eyebrow. "I've got a lot of practice." They both shared a laugh, and as she sat down on the blanket, Elizabeth couldn't help but notice how easy it was to be with him. No pretense, no expectations. Just two people who enjoyed each other's company, with no pressure to be anything other than themselves. "So, what's all this about?" Elizabeth asked, gesturing to the basket. Sebastian smiled mischievously. "I thought we could have a picnic, something simple just like us. No fancy restaurant, no pressure, just a nice afternoon in the sun." Elizabeth looked at him, surprised by the simplicity of the gesture. It wasn't grand or extravagant, but it was thoughtful. And for Elizabeth, that was everything. "You're right," she said softly. "This is perfect." They unpacked the basket together. Cheese, bread, fruit, and some homemade sandwiches that Sebastian had apparently put together himself. As they ate, they talked about everything and nothing, the conversation flowing easily between them. They joked about their childhoods, shared their favorite memories, and talked about their hopes for the future. There were no deep, heavy discussions, just two people getting to know each other in a way that felt completely natural. As the afternoon wore on, they lay on the blanket together, looking up at the sky. The clouds drifted lazily by, and for a moment Elizabeth let herself forget about everything. The doubts, the fears, the walls she had built around herself. Here, with Sebastian, she didn't need to be anything other than who she was. "Do you ever think about what the future holds?" Elizabeth asked, her voice quiet as she stared up at the sky. Sebastian was silent for a moment, and when he finally spoke, his voice was soft. "All the time. I think about the future, but not in the way I used to. It's not about the big things anymore, the success, the career. It's about the people you're with, the ones who make everything worth it. I want a future with someone I can share it all with." Elizabeth turned her head slightly to look at him. His eyes were steady, not full of expectation or pressure, just a calm certainty that made her heart race. "And do you think that person could be me?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Sebastian met her gaze, his expression warm. "I already know it is, Elizabeth, but I'm not asking you to know right now. I just want you to know that I'm here, whenever you're ready." Elizabeth swallowed, feeling the familiar stirrings of fear in her chest. The walls, built so carefully over the years, wanted to rise again. But this time, she didn't push them up. This time, she allowed herself to feel something different. Maybe it wasn't about the future or making grand plans. Maybe it was just about being here, in this moment, with him. "I'm not sure where this is going, Sebastian," she said softly. "I'm not sure I can give you the future you're asking for." "You don't have to give me anything," he replied gently. "I'm not asking for promises. I'm asking for a chance to be with you, to be part of your life, however that looks. We don't have to have it all figured out right now. I'm happy to take it one step at a time." The simplicity of his words hit Elizabeth harder than she had expected. She had spent so much of her life feeling like everything had to be planned, like every step had to lead somewhere specific. But with Sebastian it was different. There was no pressure to make a decision. There was no urgency. Just two people, sharing a moment, getting to know each other, taking things one step at a time. For the first time in a long time, Elizabeth felt the weight of the past lifting. The fear, the doubt, the uncertainty. They hadn't gone away completely, but they didn't hold the same power over her. Maybe, just maybe, she didn't have to have everything figured out. Maybe she could trust herself, trust him, and just see where the road led. As the sun began to set, casting a golden hue over the park, Sebastian took her hand in his. It wasn't a grand gesture, but it was enough. For the first time, Elizabeth didn't pull away. Instead, she squeezed his hand back, her heart swelling with a quiet hope she hadn't allowed herself to feel in years. "You're right," she said, her voice soft but sure. "One step at a time." Sebastian smiled, his eyes full of warmth. "That's all I'm asking for, Elizabeth. One step at a time." And as the evening faded into night, Elizabeth realized that, for the first time in a long time, she wasn't afraid of the future. Whatever it held, she was ready to face it, one step at a time. The days following that quiet, reassuring afternoon in the park were filled with a calm sense of clarity that Elizabeth had never experienced before. She had spent so many years building walls, convincing herself that she was better off alone. But with Sebastian, those walls didn't feel as necessary anymore. He hadn't asked her to change. He hadn't pressured her into anything. He had simply shown up consistently, without overwhelming her, giving her the space to make decisions at her own pace. In the days after their picnic, Elizabeth found herself waking up to the idea of a future she hadn't allowed herself to consider before. It was small, simple things at first. She found herself looking forward to the little moments, waking up to a text from Sebastian in the morning, finding a voicemail from him when she got home from work, sharing dinner and long talks about anything and everything. It wasn't anything extravagant, but it felt real. She wasn't being swept away in some fairy tale romance. Instead, she was building something with someone who understood her, who respected her boundaries, and who wanted her for exactly who she was. It was on a Thursday afternoon, 2 weeks after their picnic, that Elizabeth received a phone call that would test the strength of everything she had started to build with Sebastian. She was in her classroom, grading papers, when her phone buzzed. It was an unknown number, but her instincts told her to answer. "Hello?" she asked, pressing the phone to her ear. "Elizabeth?" a voice said on the other end, one that sounded familiar, but she couldn't immediately place it. "This is Elizabeth," she replied cautiously. "Elizabeth, it's your mother," the voice said, and Elizabeth's heart sank. She hadn't heard from her mother in months, not since the argument they had about her leaving the family estate and the life her mother had always hoped she would lead. There was a pause on the line, and Elizabeth could hear the faint sound of her mother's breathing. She had never been good at handling these calls, never known exactly how to navigate the complicated relationship they shared, but she couldn't avoid it forever. "What's going on, Mom?" Elizabeth asked, trying to keep her voice steady. I need to talk to you," her mother said, her voice tight with emotion. "It's important." Elizabeth hesitated. The last time they had spoken, her mother had told her that she was wasting her life, living outside of the family's world. She had insisted that Elizabeth was rejecting everything that would give her happiness, everything that would secure her future. "I don't know if I can do this right now," Elizabeth said, her heart heavy. "I've been busy with work and I—" "Elizabeth, please." Her mother interrupted. "I'm not calling to argue. I'm calling because I need you to come to the house. I need you to come home." Home. The word hit Elizabeth harder than she expected. She hadn't been to the family estate in over a year, ever since her decision to leave it all behind. She had chosen independence. And now her mother was asking her to return. "I don't think I can do that, Mom," Elizabeth said, her voice quiet. "I've told you before, I'm not part of that world anymore." "You need to come," her mother insisted. "Please, your father is very ill. He's not doing well. We need you here." The word struck Elizabeth like a blow to the chest. Her father, the man who had always been distant, who had made it clear that success and wealth were the only things that mattered, he was sick. And now her mother wanted her to return to a world she had fought so hard to leave. "I'll think about it," Elizabeth said, her voice trembling despite her best efforts to stay calm. She didn't want to go back. She didn't want to face the expectations, the coldness, the pressure. But hearing that her father was ill, that things were urgent, that changed everything. "Please, Elizabeth." Her mother's voice softened, the familiar pleading tone returning. "It's not just about your father. We're family. You need to be here." The words hung in the air between them. Elizabeth's chest tightened, and she could feel the walls she had built slowly beginning to crumble. "I'll come," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "But I can't promise anything." Her mother's voice brightened, though Elizabeth could hear the strain underneath. "That's all I ask. Just come home." Later that evening, as Elizabeth sat on the couch in her apartment, she felt an overwhelming mix of emotions. She had agreed to go, but she wasn't sure what to expect. What would it be like, returning to the place that had once felt like a prison? The life she had rejected. Was she really ready to face it again? She had built a life for herself, one that was free from the expectations of her family, and now she was being asked to return to that world. She glanced at her phone, thinking of Sebastian. She had been keeping her life with him, separate from the complexities of her family, but now it seemed impossible to keep them apart. How could she explain all of this to him? How could she make him understand why she needed to go? Elizabeth pulled up a message from Sebastian that she hadn't responded to yet, a simple "good morning" text from earlier in the day. She had been too distracted to reply. Now, as she stared at it, she realized how much she had come to rely on him, how much his presence had brought her peace in the midst of so much uncertainty. "Hey," she typed back, her fingers trembling slightly as she replied. "Something came up. I need to go visit my family. I'm not sure how long I'll be gone." The message felt like a heavy weight in her chest, and for a moment she wondered if she had made the right choice. Would Sebastian understand? Would he be there for her when she returned? A few minutes later, his response came, "I understand. Family is important. I'm here for you, no matter what. Just let me know when you're back. Take care of yourself." His words, simple and kind, were exactly what she needed to hear. She hadn't expected him to make it easy, to simply accept her decision without question. But that was the beauty of it. With Sebastian, she didn't need to explain everything. He just accepted her. That night, Elizabeth packed a small bag and made arrangements to visit her family the next morning. She wasn't sure what to expect, but she knew she had to go. For her father, for her family, and for herself. The drive to the family estate the next day was long, filled with a quiet anxiety that settled in her stomach. Elizabeth could feel the weight of her decision with every mile that passed, each turn in the road taking her closer to a life she had left behind. When she finally arrived at the gates of the estate, she hesitated for a moment before driving through. The large, imposing house loomed before her, Beautiful, yes, but cold. Empty. It had never felt like home to her. She parked in front of the grand entrance and sat there for a moment, gathering her thoughts. She wasn't sure what she was walking into, but she knew she had to face it, no matter how hard it was. As she stepped out of the car, her heart was heavy, but she walked toward the door, determined to face whatever came next. The grand entrance of the family estate loomed before Elizabeth, and with each step, the familiar weight of expectations pressed down on her chest. She hadn't expected to feel so conflicted, but as she stood on the marble porch, her hand hesitating just before the doorbell, she felt like she was standing at the edge of a precipice. What was I thinking? She thought, her heart racing. She hadn't been here in over a year, hadn't seen her parents since the argument that had sealed her decision to leave everything behind. The life she had built in her small home felt so far removed from this place. The mansion, though beautiful, had always been a place that suffocated her, a place filled with expectations, demands, and a cold distance that had defined her childhood. But now she was here, and she had no choice but to step inside. The door opened, and Elizabeth's mother stood there, a mix of relief and anxiety written across her face. Elizabeth could see the strain in her mother's eyes, the worry that hadn't been there before. The older woman's voice, though warm, was tinged with desperation. "Elizabeth, thank you for coming. I didn't know how to reach you." Elizabeth smiled weakly, though the gesture felt foreign. "I couldn't ignore you, Mom. What's going on? How's Dad?" Her mother stepped aside to let her in, and Elizabeth walked through the grand foyer, the place that had once felt like a prison to her. The marble floors and crystal chandeliers gleamed in the soft afternoon light. Everything was polished, perfect, but cold. Too perfect. "He's not doing well, honey. He's been in and out of the hospital for weeks now. I thought we had more time." Her mother trailed off, her voice thick with emotion. "I need you here. Your father needs you." Elizabeth followed her mother down the long hallway, each step taking her further into the life she had walked away from. Her father's office door was slightly ajar, and Elizabeth felt a strange tug in her chest as they approached. The man she had once known as her father, stern, distant, always busy with his business, was lying in a hospital bed, frail and weakened. When he looked up, his eyes seemed to focus on her for a moment before they clouded with confusion. Elizabeth hadn't realized how much time had passed until she saw him like this. The man who had once commanded rooms, whose presence had always been so overwhelming, now looked so small, so vulnerable. "Dad," Elizabeth whispered, her voice breaking. She hadn't expected this. Seeing him like this, weak and fragile, stirred something deep within her, a sense of loss that she hadn't anticipated. He looked at her, with a mix of recognition and frustration. You came," he rasped, his voice barely above a whisper. "I didn't expect you to." Elizabeth sat by his side, feeling a wave of conflicting emotions. Her father had always been the picture of control, of expectations. He had never shown affection in the way she had hoped. But now, seeing him like this, she realized that maybe, just maybe, there had been more to their relationship than she had allowed herself to see. "I didn't know what to expect either," she said softly, taking his hand in hers. The moment felt fragile, like stepping onto a tightrope. "But I'm here now." For a long time, neither of them spoke. Silence between them felt heavy, but it wasn't uncomfortable. It was like they were both trying to process everything that had been left unsaid for so many years. Finally, her father broke the silence. "I was hard on you," he said, his voice faint but laced with a hint of regret. "I wanted the best for you, but I didn't know how to show it. I didn't know how to be..." the father you needed. Elizabeth blinked back the unexpected tears. She hadn't expected this, hadn't expected to hear him speak with such vulnerability. All those years of feeling like she was never good enough, of feeling like she had to fight for her father's approval. Suddenly, they seemed like distant memories, even though the scars remained. "You didn't have to be perfect, Dad," Elizabeth whispered, her voice soft but filled with truth. "You just had to be there." He squeezed her hand gently. "I know. I'm sorry for not being there when you needed me most." Her heart softened, the walls she had built starting to give way. She wasn't sure how long this moment would last, or how much could be healed with just a few words. But for the first time, she allowed herself to let go of some of the anger that had kept her distant from her family. She wasn't here to relive the past. She was here because her father needed her, and maybe, just maybe, she needed him too. Later that evening after dinner, Elizabeth found herself sitting in the large living room, the faint sound of music playing in the background. Her mother had left the room, giving them some space. The house, still grand and immaculate, seemed emptier now. As Elizabeth gazed out the window at the sprawling estate, she couldn't help but reflect on everything that had led her here. She had spent so many years running, rejecting everything this world represented. But now, standing in the heart of it again, she realized that it wasn't the world she had rejected. It was the way it had made her feel. Sebastian's words echoed in her mind. "You don't have to lose yourself, Elizabeth. I'm not going anywhere." For the first time, she truly understood what he had meant. She didn't have to lose herself. She could still be who she was, even as she embraced the parts of her past she had rejected. The walls she had built to keep the world at bay weren't necessary anymore. They had kept her safe, but they had also kept her from living. Just as Elizabeth was lost in thought, her phone buzzed. She picked it up, and a wave of relief washed over her when she saw Sebastian's name on the screen. "How's everything going? Are you okay?" It was simple, but it meant more than she could express. She wasn't alone. She quickly typed a response. "It's a lot. But I'm handling it. I'll be home soon. Thank you for checking in." The message felt like a lifeline, pulling her back from the edge of her old fears. No matter what happened here with her family, she wasn't facing it alone. Sebastian was waiting for her. Elizabeth stayed at the family estate for the next few days, navigating the delicate balance between the past and the present. Her father's health continued to decline, and though he was weak, he insisted on speaking to her at length, trying to make amends for all the years he had been absent. Elizabeth listened, absorbing every word, but she couldn't ignore the ache in her heart. She had longed for this connection, but it was bittersweet to realize that it had come too late. Still, she appreciated his effort, his apology, and for the first time, she allowed herself to grieve the lost years. Her mother, though still pushing for Elizabeth to return to the fold, softened slightly in the face of her husband's illness. The cold walls between them had not disappeared, but there was a quiet understanding now. Elizabeth wasn't sure if it was enough to mend their strained relationship, but it was a start. On the third evening, Elizabeth stood outside in the cool air, her thoughts scattered, when she received another text from Sebastian. "I've been thinking about you. I hope things are getting better. Let me know when you're ready to come home." The message was simple, but it warmed her heart. She hadn't realized how much she needed that small connection, how much she missed the simplicity of their moments together. She typed back, "I'm coming home tomorrow. Thank you for being there." As she stared at the glowing screen of her phone, a sense of peace settled over her. No matter what her past had been, no matter what unresolved feelings lingered with her family, she was finally ready to return to the life she had built with Sebastian, one where love wasn't a burden, but a gift. The drive back to her apartment the following day was a blur. Elizabeth didn't know if it was exhaustion from the emotional toll of the past few days or the lingering weight of unresolved family matters, but her mind was clouded with uncertainty. Still, there was a sense of relief as she neared her home. The familiar streets, the cozy feel of her apartment. It was a reminder of the life she had built for herself, independent and free. When she pulled into the parking space and stepped out of the car, the air felt different, lighter. For the first time in a long time, she felt like she was stepping into her future, not weighed down by the past. Her phone buzzed as she walked towards the door. A message from Sebastian. "I'm glad you're coming home. Can't wait to see you." Her heart warmed at the simplicity of his words. He had been her anchor, offering nothing but patience and understanding. As she opened the door to her apartment, she took a deep breath. Everything was waiting for her: her work, her life, and most importantly, Sebastian. She had taken the first step toward healing, toward reconciling with her past. Now she was ready to fully embrace the future. She sat down at the kitchen table, the weight lifting from her shoulders. It was time to move forward, to allow love, in all its simplicity, to be a part of her life. She typed back to Sebastian, "I'm home. Let's take the next step together." The following days were filled with a quiet joy that Elizabeth hadn't known in years. Sebastian was there, by her side, not as a force trying to change her, but as someone who simply wanted to be part of her life. They spent their time together with ease, enjoying simple moments, walking through the park, cooking dinner, and laughing together. Elizabeth had finally accepted that love didn't have to come with fear. It didn't have to make her lose herself. It was simply a gift, one she was ready to embrace. For the first time, her future felt open and full of promise. As they sat on the couch, hand in hand, she looked at Sebastian and smiled. "We're ready for this, aren't we?" she whispered. He squeezed her hand. "Absolutely." And for the first time in a long time, Elizabeth was certain. She had found her place. Thank you for being here. If something in this story stayed with you, I'd love to see you again. Subscribe, and tomorrow I'll bring you another story crafted with heart.